Death has been cited as the great equalizer, as we will all meet with it. It's an occurrence that is often unexpected, and it leaves a ripple effect on the living left behind. It causes them to question their own mortality and share in the memories of the deceased. I didn't feel the impact of Trace Memory's story until I dealt with the death of my own loved ones. To me, Trace is a story for the people who've lost someone. In this episode of Dead Franchises, a eulogy not only goes out to the death of a game series, but to the company that left gamers with fond memories with their seemingly unfinished work. Founded in 1999 with a mission of providing gamers with new and unique experiences, Cing started out as an independent game development company before working exclusively with Nintendo until Cing's untimely bankruptcy in March of 2010. Their first effort as a developer was 2003's Glass Rose for the PlayStation 2. Glass Rose is a point-and-click adventure with psychological horror elements. Players control Takashi Kagatani, an investigative reporter displaced 70 years in the past as he tries to solve the murders of the Yoshinodo mansion and find a way back to his own timeline. In many ways, Glass Rose feels like a lost Kenji Eno adventure game like D or Enemy Zero, with many CGI cutscenes interrupting the gameplay and supernatural occurrences to keep the player's interest piqued. Each chapter of the game has a time limit of 1 hour to complete the entire chapter, which could be seen as a detriment for players just trying to enjoy the story or solve tough puzzles. Glass Rose was known for the free word mechanic, where Takashi would remember previous conversations with other characters, highlight certain topics within those conversations, and then press for more information on those topics. This system laid the groundwork for Hotel Dusk, as Hotel Dusk used a similar system, only more streamlined. Unfortunately, Glass Rose suffered from Indigo Prophecy Syndrome, wherein you have a compelling story hampered by forced QTE segments. Instead of immersing the player in the tension of the moment, the QTEs in Glass Rose pause the cutscene so the player can move the mouse icon and click on a pop-up to continue the cutscene. I'm just glad Cing noticed this was a poor idea and abandoned the idea entirely in future games. Glass Rose never saw a US release, surprise surprise, but it did get a release in Europe in 2004. It's a real shame it never came out over here because despite a few mechanical missteps, it's a great mystery adventure with Cing quality writing behind it. It seemed as if Cing took the criticisms of Glass Rose to heart when developing their next title for the new handheld entering the marketplace in 2004. Their new title was called Anazā Kōdo, or more commonly known in the US by the "we must incorporate DS-related puns into every Western title" Trace Memory. Trace Memory is a short but sweet tale of a 14-year-old girl, Ashley Mizuki Robbins, as she seeks out her estranged father, Richard. Once presumed dead father, Richard. Ashley and her aunt/guardian, Jessica, sail out to the mysterious Blood Edward Island to meet up with Richard, and along the way, Ashley has a nightmare that reveals a dark truth about her past. Ashley's father sent her a Nintendo DS in the mail, or DTS as it's known in the game, which stands for Dual Trace System, which doesn't make a lot of sense. In Europe and Japan, it's known as a DAS, or Dual Another System, which by all accounts makes more sense story-wise. Now, for a launch title on the Nintendo DS, it's quite inviting of the game to build a connection with the player by implementing the system itself as integral to solving the mystery, and for taking on the challenge of using the DS's features to their full potential. But more on that later. So on the top screen of the DS is usually reserved for cutscenes, dialogue, and shuffling through the environment Ashley is currently in. The bottom screen is used primarily for moving Ashley around the game world from a top-down perspective, as well as selecting topics and puzzle solving using the touchscreen. In the environment, Ashley can also find hidden DS cartridges throughout the game that provide additional exposition conversation about Richard's time on the isolated Blood Edward Island. They're optional, but they're just nice to have there. As Ashley converses with other characters, she gathers new topics automatically, abandoning Glass Rose's highlight mechanic entirely. What I enjoy about the conversations within Trace and other Cing games is the sense of genuine humanity within each of the characters. Never do I feel like the characters are some stock anime cliche turned up to 11. Ashley responds to the characters in a realistic manner, sometimes sarcastic, often inquisitive. Another often overlooked part of the character building comes from when Ashley interacts with objects on the screen. She'll occasionally commentate on what she's looking at with a personal anecdote. I love it when writers allow for the protagonist to remark about the world around them, as it lends to a greater immersion within that world. It's the same reason why I still love Silent Hill 3's Heather, because like Ashley, she also tells a bit about herself through the interaction with the objects within the world. Speaking of the game world, the design of both the pre-rendered stills and the 3D maps are top-notch. The lead up to the Edward Mansion demonstrates the attention to atmosphere by Cing. There's light peeking through the trees, shadows, birds flying overhead, ambient wind in the background, and a rich amount of colors on the landscape. For a launch DS game, it's superb. The soundtrack of the game evokes a melancholic emotion within the player as they travel the dusty halls of the vacant Edward Manor. There are also some thrilling compositions that amp up the tension in the more dramatic scenes too. The soundtrack is a small but fitting arrangement of tunes, and I highly recommend giving it a listen. The story of Trace Memory is broken up into 7 chapters, including an epilogue, all of which have a chapter recap at the end where Ashley recalls the main events that transpired in order to organize her thoughts and memories. Now, from this point forward, I'm going to discuss the spoilers about the story here, so go ahead and take 5 hours out of your day and play it if you haven't. It's like $13. Scenario and game designer Rika Suzuki stated that she prefers stories that are emotionally moving, and in my opinion, Trace delivers on that promise. The themes of Trace Memory deal heavily with loss, the loss of loved ones, of relationships, and of memories. It's an emotional roller coaster of a story, with Ashley challenging the validity of her memories in order to understand the truth behind the murder of her mother, Sayako, an event that a young Ashley was witness to. The subject matter of Trace Memory is uncharacteristically dark for a Nintendo-produced IP. Rika Suzuki comments that one thing that is reflected in my work is the idea of memories as a device for moving the story along. One of the things I try to acknowledge is the difference between a recollection and a memory. When my father was very young, he lived in Shanghai, and because of the disease, he became able to draw very detailed maps of that area, which he couldn't before. That stimulated me to think a lot more about memory. Suzuki thought about how memories work in relation to her father's Alzheimer's disease. This introspective outlook on memories makes Trace Memory feel as if it was a labor of love and personal reflection on Suzuki's behalf. For the majority of her life, Ashley had been without a mother or father, and no one around that could relate to her loneliness. That is until she stumbles upon a graveyard in the Edward estate and meets the ghost of a young boy known only as D. D is a friendly ghost, and like Ashley, he cannot remember all the circumstances about his life. Ashley and D bond through their commonality, and they help each other on their respective quests to remember the truth. At first, I thought the inclusion of D would break the immersion I had in the story, but the more D's story unfolded, the more I became really engaged with wanting to discover what happened to him. I highly recommend going after the good ending, because if you don't, it doesn't necessarily resolve what happened to D. The only way you can get D's good ending is by triggering all of his memories, which comes through clicking on certain objects within the mansion, which allows him to recall bits of his past. Trust me, you don't want the bad ending. Now, I don't want to turn this retrospective into a political soapbox, but I want to take some time out to appreciate good examples of female characters that are often overlooked. It seems to me as if Ashley Mizuki Robbins was not included as a part of that conversation. Here we have a teenage girl that witnessed the murder of her own mother, and she has an absent father for most of her life. Now, instead of running away from situations that trigger the memory of the most tragic moment in her life, she actively seeks to understand what really happened, and she eventually comes to terms with the murder of her mother. Ashley gets ignored by sexism criers because she doesn't fit their narrative. It's not like any of that matters, as you can't appeal to people who don't play games in the first place, but credit where it's due to Tasuke Kanasaki and Rika Suzuki, because they deserve more recognition for their writing, a well-rounded female character, and ensemble cast to boot. The strain of Ashley's relationship with her father leads to an interesting conflict, both externally and within Ashley's mind, as her own uncertainty over her father's identity could mean life or death. I really like how the story carries the dialogue between Ashley and Richard. You can empathize with both characters without considering either of them in the wrong. That's just good writing. You can feel Ashley's frustration for having to go through all these puzzles and loops to meet up with her father and thinking he was dead for all these years, and then you also come to understand that Richard was just trying to protect his own daughter. Okay, so story aside, let's get to the meat of this game. As mentioned, the puzzles presented in Trace Memory make the most out of the DS's features, and we're not just talking your standard rub your way out of a paper bag. There are two puzzles that I want to highlight that require abstract thinking on the behalf of the player. Now, I'm gonna feel really dumb for admitting this, but it took me a good half hour before I figured it out. I'm talking about the puzzle that requires Ashley to use an ink stamper on a piece of paper. I tried to pixel hunt every section, blow on the screen, press all the buttons, use every item in my inventory. I just got so frustrated with trying to figure out how to stamp that ink on that piece of paper that I put my DS into sleep mode to look up the solution. Well, unbeknownst to me, I accidentally solved the puzzle by doing this. That's right, the puzzle requires you to put the DS in sleep mode. I thought that was really cool. My other favorite puzzle in the game involves a series of pictures that are presented on both the top and bottom of the screen. One of the objects will lead Ashley to a key that she needs. Now, in order to solve this one, you need to angle your DS in such a way to reflect the picture on one screen onto the other one. In the real world. I know this seems like such a basic thing, but I love little real-world inclusions in the puzzle solving. It's no dunking your Uncle Jay's letter in your kitchen sink to reveal 747 to activate a submarine, but it's pretty damn close. Beyond those two puzzles, most of the game's riddles can be easily solved, which makes Trace Memory a good gateway game for someone trying to get into visual novels. At its core, Trace Memory is a visual novel with puzzles present, but what sets it apart from other titles in the genre is the quality writing and the cleverness of the use of the DS when it comes to the puzzle solving. After playing through this game again 10 years later, I remember why I fell in love with Cing's games and how big of a loss it was to the gaming industry to lose them as a development company. I truly felt as if Nintendo believed in Trace Memory too, as Satoru Iwata himself was the executive producer. It's a real shame that the US also never got to purchase the sequel, Another Code R, for the Wii, but I'm sure that didn't stop true fans from importing it from Europe. It didn't stop me. Well, that's all I have for today's Dead Franchises. But before you go, don't forget to blow out your birthday candles on your special day.